Imagine kneeling beside a quiet eastern stream in late autumn, the forest floor carpeted with fallen leaves, fingers parting the soil to reveal a delicate string of smooth, rounded tubers, each no larger than a hen's egg, yet holding a quiet power that sustained entire communities for millennia. These are the tubers of Apios americana, the American groundnut, a slender vine that once threaded through meadows and riverbanks from the Atlantic to the Great Plains. Long before maize reached the northern woodlands, before European plows ever turned the soil, this perennial legume fed nations. Indigenous peoples returned to the same patches year after year, decade after decade, harvesting chains of protein-rich tubers from plants that needed no replanting, no tillage, no fertilizer beyond their own nitrogen-fixing roots. The vines climbed companionably over sunflowers and riverbank willows, flowered in fragrant brown-purple clusters that carried the scent of chocolate on summer air, then sank their edible treasures back into the earth for the next generation. Early colonists learned the digging from Wampanoag teachers during those first desperate winters. The tubers quite literally kept the Plymouth settlement alive when corn stores ran out. Yet within a few centuries, this abundant, resilient food vanished from tables and fields alike. Today, it grows almost unnoticed along roadsides and river edges, waiting patiently beneath the surface. What was once a cornerstone of continental food security became a footnote, displaced by annual crops that demanded constant disturbance of the soil. In an age when we are relearning the cost of that disturbance, Apios americana offers a gentle reminder of another way, a plant that gives generously, asks little, and endures.
Apios americana, known most commonly as the American groundnut or hopness, is a perennial climbing legume native to eastern and central North America. It belongs to the Fabaceae family, the same lineage as peas and beans, and shares their remarkable ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen through root nodules. Unlike annual legumes, however, Apios lives for decades from a single planting, steadily lengthening its rhizomes and producing chains of edible tubers along their length. A mature plant can form strings of tubers totaling several feet, each tuber crisp, nutty, and unusually rich in protein for a root crop. The vines may reach 6 meters in a season, twining gracefully up any available support, bearing pinnate leaves and dense racemes of chocolate-scented maroon-brown flowers that attract bumblebees and leafcutter bees alike. The plant occurs naturally from southern Canada to Florida and westward to the edge of the Great Plains, preferring moist but well-drained soils along streams, in wet meadows, and on the margins of bottomland forests. It tolerates seasonal flooding, partial shade, and poor soils that would defeat most crops. Archaeological remains and historical records confirm continuous human use for at least 9,000 years. Indigenous nations across this vast range relied on the tubers as a staple starch and protein source, especially during late winter and early spring when other foods were scarce. Tubers were eaten fresh, boiled, roasted, fried in bear fat, or dried and pounded into flour. The green seeds were cooked like peas, and even the young shoots found their way into soups. European settlers quickly adopted the plant. Records from the 1600s show English towns passing laws to prevent native people from digging groundnuts on colonial land, so valuable had the crop become. Despite this early enthusiasm, Apios never entered mainstream agriculture. Its perennial, vining nature and scattered tubers resisted the plow and the annual monoculture model that came to dominate the continent. Today, while small commercial production continues in Japan, where it is called hodoyamo, and scattered enthusiasts grow improved lines in North America and Europe, the plant remains largely wild or semi-wild. Yet modern nutritional and agronomic research has repeatedly confirmed what indigenous knowledge always knew. This is one of the most complete perennial food plants on the continent.
The story of Apios americana begins deep in the Holocene, when retreating glaciers left behind a landscape of wet prairies, oak openings, and river floodplains. Archaeological evidence places the tubers in human hands at least as far back as the early Archaic period, 8,000 to 1,000 BCE, with remains recovered from sites in present-day Missouri and Arkansas Ozark bluff shelters. Carbonized tubers excavated from 4 Ozark sites occupied by pre-Columbian peoples confirmed that groundnut was gathered and almost certainly managed long before ceramic technology or maize arrived in the region. Across the eastern woodlands and prairie margins, indigenous nations developed intimate relationships with the plant. The Omaha, Dakota, called the tubers nu or ka. The Pawnee knew them as askipa. The Menominee Hopinis, from which hopness derives. The Lenape, Delaware, and Powhatan harvested in great quantity along Atlantic coastal rivers. Ethnographic records collected by Melvin Gilmore in the early 20th century describe Dakota women digging long chains of tubers in winter, sometimes finding strings as long as a man's arm from a single plant. The tubers were peeled, boiled, and eaten immediately, or sliced thin, parboiled to remove trypsin inhibitors, then sun-dried on mats for winter storage. Dried slices were later reconstituted in soups or ground into flour for bread. Some groups roasted them in ashes or preserved them in maple syrup. The flavor was described as a cross between potato and roasted chestnut, becoming sweeter after frost. The seeds, harvested in late summer, were boiled like common peas and considered a delicacy. Young shoots were occasionally gathered as potherbs. Historical place names preserve memory of its former abundance. Sagaponack on Long Island, which means place of the groundnuts. Apios, a former name for Chester County, Pennsylvania, and the Loup River in Nebraska, which means river where new abounds. Tribal names themselves sometimes reference the plant. The Monacon or Monosacapanogs translates roughly as the diggers of groundnuts. Early European accounts are remarkably consistent in their astonishment. Thomas Harriot in 1588 wrote of open alk, found in moist and marish grounds, with roots as big as eggs, 40 on a string. In 1602, John Brereton described groundnuts as big as pomme de terre, growing 40 on a string. Champlain's expedition in 1605 was fed groundnuts by the Abenaki. In Virginia, Captain John Smith noted that the Indians seldom be without them. Perhaps most poignantly, during the starving winter of 1622-23 at Plymouth, Wampanoag neighbors taught the colonists to dig the tubers, and Edward Winslow recorded that groundnuts formed a substantial part of their diet when corn ran short. Some historians believe groundnuts were served at the 1621 harvest feast we now call Thanksgiving. Peter Kalm, the Swedish-Finnish naturalist, wrote in 1749 that native people still regarded hopness as one of their chief root foods, eating them boiled or dried like potatoes. By the late 18th century, however, many accounts already describe the plant as less common than formerly, a pattern that accelerated with the cessation of indigenous fire management. When annual burning of prairies and oak openings stopped, forests closed in within a single generation, shading out the sun-loving vines. The groundnut retreated to riverbanks and roadsides, waiting.
The decline of Apios americana was not sudden, but gradual, the result of several converging forces that favored annual over perennial, monoculture over polyculture, and European agricultural assumptions over indigenous ones. First came maize, arriving in the Northeast around AD 1000 to 1200. Though maize offered higher caloric density, many groups continued heavy reliance on groundnut alongside it. The deeper disruption came with European settlement and the introduction of the Irish potato, Solanum tuberosum, in the early 1700s. The potato produced larger individual tubers, matured in a single season, and could be more easily stored in cellars. Crucially, it fit the annual plow-based cycle colonists already knew. Apios, by contrast, scatters its tubers along wandering rhizomes, defies straight rows, and requires 2 to 3 years before substantial harvest. It resisted the new order. Colonial laws in Massachusetts and Virginia explicitly forbade native people from digging groundnuts on English-claimed land, effectively criminalizing traditional harvest. As indigenous populations were displaced or reduced, the intimate knowledge of where the best patches grew, how to encourage them with fire, and how to propagate the largest tubered individuals began to vanish. Fire suppression allowed forests to reclaim former meadows. By the mid-19th century, most Euro-American farmers viewed the plant as a weed of fence rows rather than a crop. Several attempts were made to domesticate it. Tubers were shipped to France in the 17th century and to Ireland during the 1846-52 Great Famine as a potential substitute for blighted potatoes. None took hold. The vining habit and long juvenile period did not suit European field systems. In the United States, horticultural journals of the 1850s and again in the 1890s praised its flavor and nutrition, yet no commercial variety emerged. The same pattern repeated in the early 20th century USDA trials. The plant simply did not conform to the emerging industrial model that demanded mechanical harvest, uniform maturity, and high-starch, low-protein. By the mid-20th century, Apios Americana had become little more than a botanical curiosity in its homeland, while in Japan, introduced accidentally or as an ornamental, it quietly became a minor health food crop under the name hodoimo. The loss was not of the plant itself, it still grows wild in abundance, but of the cultural and agronomic knowledge that once made it a foundation food.
Modern analytical work has repeatedly confirmed what indigenous people knew by experience. Apios americana is nutritionally exceptional among root crops. Dry weight protein content ranges from 13 to 17.5%, roughly 3 times that of potato and higher than sweet potato or cassava. The protein is of high quality, containing all essential amino acids in favorable ratios, with only cysteine and methionine slightly limiting, values confirmed across multiple studies, Yanowiski and Kingsbury, 1938, Wilson and others, 1987, Reynolds and others, 1990, and Whiteley and others, 2021. Fresh tubers average 69 to 75% moisture, yielding approximately 4.5 to 5% protein on a fresh weight basis, still far superior to potatoes' 2%. Genistein and other isoflavones are present in concentrations higher than soybean, with documented anti-carcinogenic, anti-diabetic, and cardiovascular benefits in animal models, Krishnan, 1998, and Ichie and others, 2013. Tubers are also rich in calcium, 968 milligrams per 100 grams dry, and iron. The seeds contain up to 25 to 30% protein. As a legume, Apios fixes its own nitrogen, often forming abundant nodules that enrich surrounding soil. Established stands require no fertilizer and minimal tillage after the first year. Louisiana State University Breeding Program, 1985 to 1996, directed by Dr. W.J. Blackman, selected lines that produced up to 8 pounds, 3.6 kilograms, of fresh tubers per plant in the third year, with individual tubers reaching 15 to 20 centimeters long and 5 to 6 centimeters diameter. Some genotypes yielded over 20 t per acre fresh weight when trellised and fertilized, comparable to good potato crops without nitrogen input. Blackman and Reynolds, 1986, Reynolds and others, 1990. Triploid lines, common in northern populations, produce larger tubers faster and are sterile, allowing vegetative propagation without risk of genetic drift. The plant shows remarkable resilience, flood-tolerant, moderately shade-tolerant, able to persist under forest canopy for decades, yet responding dramatically to light and fertility. It survives -30°C winters with mulch and grows from sea level to at least 1,000 meters elevation. Recent UK trials in 2021 confirmed that tubers retain quality after more than a year in refrigerated storage, cook faster than potatoes, and possess a firmer, less watery texture with pronounced nutty flavor. Rat feeding trials in Japan have shown lowered blood pressure, cholesterol, and triglycerides. EY and Oku, 2006. Flower extracts reduce blood glucose in diabetic mice. Protease inhibitors present in raw tubers are completely denatured by 15 minutes boiling, leaving a safe, highly digestible food. Perhaps most importantly in an era of soil degradation, Apios offers a perennial starch protein crop that actually improves soil rather than depleting it. Interest in Apios has never been higher among perennial crop researchers and ecological farmers. The germplasm collection initiated at Louisiana State University is now maintained by Dr. Stephen Cannon at Iowa State University, with over 200 accessions available to researchers through the USDA GRIN system. The Utopian Seed Project in North Carolina conducts ongoing field trials of both wild and LSU lines. In the United Kingdom, Incredible Vegetables, Wales, and the Agroforestry Research Trust maintain breeding populations and sell planting material. In the United States, Experimental Farm Network, Triple Brook Farm, Massachusetts, Oikos Tree Copse, Michigan, and Twixwood Nursery occasionally offer tubers or plants of improved selections. Small commercial Hodoimo production continues in Japan's northern prefectures. Wild harvesting remains legal on many public lands with permit and is encouraged by foragers who note that careful digging actually propagates the plant. Several community seed libraries and permaculture nurseries now distribute diploid seed for those wishing to select their own landraces. A small but growing number of market gardeners report selling fresh tubers at premium prices to restaurants seeking local, perennial, nutrient-dense produce. Start with healthy tubers or young plants in spring after last frost. Choose a site with rich, moist, well-drained soil in full sun to partial shade. Apios tolerates clay and seasonal wet feet, but dislikes standing water in summer. Plant tubers 5 to 8 centimeters deep, 30 to 60 centimeters apart in rows 1.5 to 2 meters apart. Provide a sturdy trellis, fence, or companion shrubs for the vines to climb. Without support, they will sprawl and yield less. Mulch heavily to retain moisture and suppress weeds. No fertilization is usually needed after establishment. The plants fix their own nitrogen. Water generously the first year. In year 1, expect mostly vine growth and small tubers. Year 2, yields improve dramatically. Year 3 and beyond, a single plant can produce 1 to 3 kilograms of tubers. Harvest after first frost, when leaves yellow, tubers sweetest then, or leave in ground and dig as needed through winter. Tubers store well in damp sand or refrigerator for over a year. Traditional preparation: peel, optional, boil 15 to 20 minutes until tender, serve with fat or salt. Slice and dry for winter. Roast in coals. Modern uses: pressure cook 8 minutes, mash with butter, fry into cakes, add to soups or stews, roast with herbs, or ferment into miso-like paste, Japanese practice. Beans pressure cook 20 to 25 minutes after overnight soak. Young shoots blanch and sauté like asparagus tips. Flowers are edible raw in salads.
Apios Americana asks almost nothing of us and gives everything in return: protein, starch, soil fertility, beauty, and resilience, all from the same plant year after year. In a world learning the hard limits of annual monocultures, this quiet vine offers a living bridge back to an older, gentler agriculture that worked with the land rather than against it. Every tuber we plant today is an act of quiet restoration, reweaving a thread that was nearly lost. The groundnut did not disappear because it failed. It disappeared because we forgot how to listen to plants that refuse to be hurried. Now, as the climate shifts and soils tire, we have a chance to remember.